Great performance. Given how much you are representing your country and so many people take pride out of your results, do you actually, is it ever kind of a challenge to make sure that you prioritize yourself and that?
They crossed oceans, they emptied their savings, they queued for hours in the London drizzle. And when the gates of the All England Club finally opened, hundreds of them were turned away. The sea of red, white, and blue had arrived in full force. Nurses from Birmingham, engineers from Berlin, families from Toronto, students from Melbourne. The Filipino diaspora had mobilized like never before, descending upon SW19 with a single mission, to watch Alex Eala make history. But Wimbledon wasn't ready. Security guards were overwhelmed. The famous queue, which had already drawn 10,000 fans by 8:30 a.m., was at breaking point. Hundreds of Filipino fans, some who had traveled thousands of miles, were denied entry. They stood outside the gates, flags in hand, watching on big screens while their hero fought for history just meters away. When Alex Eala learned what had happened, something inside her snapped. The girl who had always been gracious, always been composed, always been the picture of Philippine resilience, she was furious, and for the first time she fired back. Was this just another scheduling failure? Or something far more troubling? The Wimbledon queue, a hallowed British tradition, had never seen anything like it. By 8:30 in the morning, more than 10,000 people had already lined up. They came from every corner of the globe, nurses from Birmingham, who had traded their hospital shifts for center court, engineers from Berlin who had taken leave from their desks, students from Melbourne who had drained their savings accounts, and families from Toronto who had packed their bags and their flags. The Filipino diaspora had mobilized with a single mission: to watch Alex Eala make history. The demand was unlike anything Wimbledon had ever witnessed. Ticket sales had been so strong that the Philippine Sports Commission chairman, Patrick Gregorio, remarked on the overwhelming response back home, noting that the demand for tickets was so high it was almost suffocating. The online ticketing system crashed multiple times, the phone lines were jammed, and the famous queue was at breaking point. But the volume of requests wasn't the only thing that stunned officials. It was the source. The vast majority of the demand came from Filipino fans who had turned Wimbledon into a virtual home tournament. A Wimbledon official, speaking on condition of anonymity, admitted, "We've never seen anything like this. We've had superstars before, Federer, Nadal, Serena, but this is different. This is a movement. And we weren't prepared for it." Security guards were overwhelmed. Hundreds of fans who had traveled thousands of miles were denied entry. They stood outside the gates, flags in hand, watching on big screens while their hero fought for history just meters away. The chaos was eerily familiar to what had happened in Melbourne just 6 months earlier, when organizers had placed Eala on the small court 6 and thousands had been turned away. The Australian Open had promised to learn from its mistake, but at Wimbledon, history was repeating itself. The fans who had crossed oceans to support their hero were being left outside. And when Alex Eala learned what had happened, something inside her finally snapped. To understand why the scene at Wimbledon was so devastating, you have to look back at what happened in Melbourne. The warning signs had been there for months, and Wimbledon officials had chosen to ignore them. On January 19, 2026, a record-breaking crowd of 68,687 filled Melbourne Park. Alex Eala, then 20 years old, was scheduled to play on Court 6. A small field court with a capacity of less than 5,500 people. The decision was a disaster from the start. Thousands of Filipinos had descended on Melbourne Park, creating a logjam that left tournament organizers scrambling. The line to get onto Court 6 snaked all around the perimeter of the grounds. Many people arrived hours in advance, but a large number were unable to enter the court, which was at full capacity. Hundreds were turned away, forced to settle for packed outdoor viewing areas, watching on big screens. The noise from inside the stands was deafening. Britain's BJK Cup captain Anne Keothavong was stunned. "I couldn't believe the queues. Who's on the scheduling team?" she remarked. The Australian Open account responded to one frustrated fan on X. "We really appreciate your feedback. We will take it as learning and come back strong next year." But the damage was done. Eala, who had raced to a 6-0 first set, ultimately fell to Alicia Parks in 3 sets. After the match, she was swiftly escorted from the court by heavy security, surrounded by as many as a dozen guards. The dream had ended in heartbreak, and yet, even in defeat, the support continued. Eala said, "That's one of the things that makes a loss like today a little bit harder is I know a lot of people were rooting for me. I just hope that the support continues with the losses along with the wins." The Australian Open had promised to learn. Wimbledon had not. 2 days after dismantling defending champion Iga Swiatek on center court, Alex Eala walked back onto the most iconic stage in tennis. Standing across the net was Jasmine Paolini, a 2-time Grand Slam finalist who had been here before. But the atmosphere on Court 12, where Eala had been scheduled to play her opening matches, should have been electric. Instead, it was different. The sea of red, white, and blue that had carried her through every match was thinner than it should have been. Hundreds of fans who had traveled thousands of miles were locked out, forced to watch on big screens. The chants that had echoed across Court 3, Alex, Alex, were quieter. The energy that had propelled her past Swiatek was missing. Eala's supporters had made a de facto home match for the 5'9" lefty. But on this day, that home advantage was stolen from her. The thousands of Filipino flags that should have filled center court were instead waving outside the gates. Paolini, for her part, knew exactly what she was missing. She had seen the phenomenon up close. She has a huge crowd with her, she had said before the match. Now on the bridge they were screaming, Alex, Alex. It's so good for our sport. But the crowd that Paolini had feared wasn't there in full force. The seats that should have been a sea of red, white, and blue were occupied by casual spectators who didn't chant her name. The energy that had helped carry Eala past the defending champion was muted. And when she needed it most, she was left to fight alone. The fans who had crossed oceans to be there were locked out. And when the final point landed, Eala's victory, her historic place in the Wimbledon quarterfinals, was celebrated by a crowd that was not nearly as loud as it should have been. The girl who had always been gracious, the girl who had always been composed, the girl who had always been the picture of Philippine resilience. She was furious. When Alex Eala learned that hundreds of her fellow Filipinos had been denied entry to watch her historic Wimbledon debut, she couldn't contain her anger any longer. In a post-match press conference that would be replayed millions of times, Eala let loose. Her voice trembled with emotion. Her eyes burned with frustration. "I don't understand," she said, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. In Melbourne, they made the same mistake. They promised they would learn. And now, here at Wimbledon, it's happening again. Everywhere I go, my fans show up. Everywhere I go, they fill the stadiums. And yet, tournament after tournament, I'm placed on courts that can't hold them, and security isn't prepared. She paused, taking a deep breath. Then, she delivered the words that would stun the tennis world. "I know how notoriously difficult it is to get tickets to this event," she said. "To have what I would call a full house of almost all Filipinos is amazing. But when they're turned away, when they've traveled thousands of miles and emptied their savings accounts, it's not amazing. It's not fair. It's not right." The room fell silent. Reporters exchanged glances. Cameras captured every moment. "These people are my support system," she continued. "They're the reason I can keep fighting. And when they're denied entry, it hurts more than any loss ever could." Her fury wasn't just about Wimbledon. It was about the pattern, the disregard, the persistent underestimation of what she and her fans represented. She had been carrying the weight of 115 million Filipinos on her shoulders. She had been doing it with grace, with humility, with resilience. But now, she was drawing a line in the sand. "If this keeps happening," she said, "I will start speaking with my feet. I will tell my fans not to come. I will tell them to stay home. Because what's the point of traveling halfway around the world if you can't even get into the stadium?" The threat was unprecedented. A player publicly telling her fans to stay away? It was unheard of. But Eala wasn't just any player. She was the voice of a nation. And she was done being silent. The tennis world was stunned. The WTA was stunned. And Wimbledon was scrambling to contain the damage. The fury had been unleashed. And now, the tennis world was scrambling to respond. Wimbledon officials were immediately on the defensive. They issued a statement acknowledging the unprecedented demand for Eala's matches and promising to review their scheduling procedures. But the damage had already been done. The images of frustrated Filipino fans locked out of Court 12 were already circulating across social media. The hashtag #LetThemIn was trending worldwide. The WTA, which had already witnessed the chaos in Melbourne, released a statement of its own. "We are aware of the concerns raised by Alexandra Eala and her fans," the statement read. "We are committed to working with tournament organizers to ensure that all players and their supporters are treated fairly." The Philippine Sports Commission, which had been closely monitoring the situation, expressed its disappointment. Chairman Patrick Gregorio had already seen the demand firsthand when tickets for the Philippine Women's Open sold out rapidly. He had prepared for crowds. He had installed additional seating and LED walls. He had planned for a surge in support. But Wimbledon hadn't, and the cost was clear. The fans who had crossed oceans to support their hero had been left outside the gates. The energy that should have carried Eala to victory was muted. And the dream that should have been a celebration was shadowed by frustration. Eala's warning had been stark. If this keeps happening, she will tell her fans to stay home. The tennis world had been warned, and now the question was simple. Would they finally learn? They crossed oceans. They They emptied their savings. They queued for hours in the London drizzle. And when the gates of the All England Club finally opened, hundreds of them were turned away. The sea of red, white, and blue had arrived in full force. Nurses from Birmingham, engineers from Berlin, families from Toronto, students from Melbourne. The Filipino diaspora had mobilized like never before, descending upon SW19 with a single mission: to watch Alex Eala make history. But Wimbledon wasn't ready. Security guards were overwhelmed. The famous queue was at breaking point. Hundreds of fans who had traveled thousands of miles were denied entry. The chaos was eerily familiar. In Melbourne, at the Australian Open, the same thing had happened. Thousands of Filipinos had descended on Court 6, creating a logjam that left tournament organizers scrambling. Britain's BJK Cup captain Anne Keothavong was stunned. "I couldn't believe the queues. Who's on the scheduling team?" The Australian Open had promised to learn from its mistake. Wimbledon had not. When Alex Eala learned what had happened, she was furious. In a post-match press conference that stunned the tennis world, she let loose. "I don't understand," she said. "In Melbourne, they made the same mistake. They promised they would learn. And now here at Wimbledon, it's happening again. Everywhere I go, my fans show up. And yet, tournament after tournament, I'm placed on courts that can't hold them, and security isn't prepared." Her fury wasn't just about Wimbledon. It was about the pattern, the disregard, the persistent underestimation of what she and her fans represented. "If this keeps happening," she said, "I will tell my fans to stay home. Because what's the point of traveling halfway around the world if you can't even get into the stadium?" The tennis world was stunned. Wimbledon scrambled to respond. But the damage had been done. The images of frustrated Filipino fans locked out of Court 12 had already gone viral. The hashtag "Let Them In" was trending worldwide. Eala had spoken. She had drawn her line in the sand. And now the tennis world would have to answer one question. Would they finally learn, or would the chaos continue? Was this just another scheduling failure or something far more troubling?